To begin recording this now, and we'll get started. Welcome to session number 13 of Old Testament Survey. We're in the book of Genesis, and we'll begin at chapter 37. Chapter 37 introduces us to the story of Joseph, one of Jacob's 12 sons. Joseph is a son of Rachel, but Joseph is not the child of promise. Joseph is not in the messianic line. He is in this story for a couple of special reasons. The story of Joseph is interesting and practical. There's a great deal we can learn from just from reading the Joseph story, and we're going to do that. I think that the practical applications are probably central in this story, but more than that, Joseph forms the foundation of our understanding of the development of the people of Israel. There are a lot of dates to know in studying the Old Testament, and some of them make more difference than others. The Joseph narrative fits into a whole lot of other chronology, a whole lot of other history. Joseph helps us to understand what Israel was doing in Egypt, and it gives us a beginning point for a period of time that is 430 years long. The oppression of Israel, we're told earlier in the book, Abraham was told this, would last 400 years. So this is going to be a significant length of time. I need to draw a timeline for you. Let me see if I can make that happen by building a whiteboard. Here, I'm going to show you just a basic timeline for the period. I think a green line will do the job. So here's 2000 BC, and over here would be around 1000 BC. And by 1000 BC, we've got David on the throne, and we've got Israel as a nation. 2000 BC, you've got Abraham. So Abraham was born in 2166. There's Abraham. Isaac was born in 2066. So there's Isaac. Jacob is born in 2006. a lot of sixes, a lot of twos, and a lot of sixes. So here's Jacob. We don't have a birth date for Joseph. Joseph's birth date actually doesn't make a whole lot of difference. Joseph is one of the sons of Jacob's old age. The date that we do have that turns out to be important to us is 1876 BC. This is the date that I call the Joseph date, but it's also the date when Israel, Jacob and his sons and their family, goes into Egypt. Israel into Egypt is in 1876 BC. Now, how can I be so sure of that? Because we have another date down here just a little ways. Oops, let me get the right color. Here is 1500 BC, and shortly after 1500 BC, in 1446 BC, is a very important event called the Exodus. And the key player in this, of course, is Moses. And we're told when Moses came up out of Egypt that it was a certain number of years when they're getting ready to cross the Jordan. The book of Joshua, we're told after Moses' death, Joshua took the people in, and it was in the 400 and something. No, that's not right either. Well, yeah, the Exodus takes place 430 years after. I'm sorry. I'm getting myself all pizzle sprung here. This is in Deuteronomy 12, I believe. It tells us that the period of time between the Exodus and reaching back to the going down into Egypt is 430 years. We also know that the temple was first constructed by Solomon in 976 BC. And we're told in that verse that the period between the temple and the Exodus is 480 years. And this date, the date of the temple, is very dateable. That's the 4th year of Solomon's reign. And we know that Solomon began to reign in 980 BC. His date is easy to nine. Oh boy, that should actually be 966 BC. Anyway, 480 years to 1446 BC, and our rest of Old Testament history goes from these points. So we can say that we've got key points here and here and here, and all of these things make sense. All of it holds together, and the history lays out for us. When Joseph goes down into Egypt, he lays the basis for the rest of Israel coming down into Egypt. We're actually developing some very interesting background material in Egypt today, places where Joseph had his home, where the people of Israel lived in an area we call the land of Goshen and the Wadi Tumilat of Egypt. We're actually developing more and more archaeological support for Israel's presence in Egypt at about the time that the Bible says that Israel was in Egypt. The Exodus, of course, is the next book in the Old Testament. So we can see how Joseph is laying the foundation for this next step in the story, which is the book of Exodus. It's important to note that over 400 years of history is missing. There's a great deal that probably went on during all of those years, not only of prosperity, but of persecution, oppression. All of that was going on, and we're not told a thing about that. Now, between the Exodus and Solomon's temple, we're given quite a bit of detail. God only gives us the detail in the Bible that we need to have in order to understand what's really going on. Often there are details that we'd like that we just don't get. But these dates are important. And let's get out of that. And I'm going to open up the PowerPoint program. Bingo. And okay. So 37 to 50 of Genesis is the succession from Jacob. These are the generations of Jacob. And what this amounts to is Joseph's story. The whole thing is about Joseph. Joseph and his adventures in Egypt. So today we're going to look at Joseph's adventures in Egypt, but let's not forget where we are in the big story. Joseph is a transitional character, and Egypt is even a transitional location. For all of its importance in world history, Egypt serves as an incubator, a seed bed, a place for Israel to grow. Things like the pyramids way in the background there and this great Sphinx were already ancient by the time Joseph went to Egypt. He certainly saw this very same scene. This was his location and his place of work. The story of Joseph starts off in chapter 37. We're told in 37:1 that Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojourning, in the land of Canaan. So there's Jacob doing his thing, and it was for a while. Now these are the generations of Jacob. Now notice that term is used the same way it's always used. The generations of Jacob means here's what came from Jacob, and it introduces the Joseph story. Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Okay, so we start off with the story of Joseph with this this note that Joseph is not popular with his brothers because he has a tendency to tattle. He tells his dad about whatever bad things his brothers have been up to. That's not a good thing. That's actually a really bad thing. Joseph is an immature boy. He's 17 years old, and he's a bit of a brat, I think. Joseph turns out okay, but at this point, let's not put Joseph on too big a pedestal. He's a bratty little brother who tattles on his older brothers. Now, the older brothers by this time are grown men. They're in their 40s. They're completely grown up. So Joseph really has no position to be telling tales. At any rate, he brought a bad report to their father. Now, verse 3 tells us a little bit more about Joseph's situation. Israel, that's Jacob, loved Joseph more than any other of his sons because he was the son of his old age. Benjamin hadn't been born yet. And he made him a robe of many colors, or a coat of many colors. The multicolored coat was a symbol of Joseph's position. It was Jacob's intention that Joseph be the inheritor, that he be the heir of all of Jacob's property. It was Jacob's intention that Joseph be the child of promise. As it's going to turn out, Joseph is not the child of promise. That's going to be Judah. Judah is also not the firstborn. I find it fascinating how does these things. So we're going to see the story of Judah in the next chapter, and it's not a particularly pretty story. Matter of fact, Judah in the rest of this chapter is not a particularly admirable character. At any rate, here we are. He made him a robe of many colors. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. And then, beginning of verse 5, 37:5, Joseph had a dream. Now, Joseph is going to have two dreams here. They're interrelated. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. Ooh, so what's the dream? And he said to him, "Hear this dream that I've dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf rose and stood upright, and your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." All right, that's a fairly obvious dream. And his brothers said to him, "Are you indeed to reign over us? Are you indeed to rule over us?" So they hated him even more. Okay, what's Joseph's dream about? Well, Joseph probably didn't know at this time, but this is quite a dream. The dream that one day his brothers would bow down to him. Here he is, the bratty little brother, and he has a dream that one day he'll be a person of some importance. That's not a bad dream to have. This is Joseph's dream, and throughout the story, we're going to be running into dreams and Joseph's relationship to his own dream and the dreams of the people who cross his paths. The dreams tend to be very interesting. And I take it that those dreams are at the core of the story. So that's what we'll look at. We'll take this apart and dream a little dream here. And then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers. He said, "Behold, I dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing down to me." Okay, that's fairly clear also. But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him. Even Jacob rebuked Joseph and said, "What is this dream? What kind of dream is that, kid? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you?" And his brothers were jealous of him because his father kept the saying in mind. Okay. Jacob is wondering what this is about because, as you recall, the brothers don't know anything about dreams, but Jacob has had some dreams. Jacob had a dream about a ladder. Jacob had a dream that maybe involved wrestling with an angel. Jacob is a very interesting character, and he has interacted with God on several occasions. I don't take Jacob as a very mature believer, even at this point in his life. I take him as still being quite a childish character. But he recognizes in Joseph's dreams that something may well be going on, something important may well be happening. So he keeps it in his mind. Verse 12 takes us the next step in this story. Brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. I'm not going to take time to draw you a map here, but let's say that Jacob and the family are set up. Their tents are pitched near Hebron, which is at the south end of the central mountain spine on a road that we call the Patriarchal Highway. And he sent the boys north to a place about 20 miles north of Jerusalem called Shechem. Shechem is in the Central Mountains, again, right on the Patriarch's Highway. And Joseph went to see how things were going with the boys and with the flock. I find it kind of sad that Jacob didn't know the animosity, the hatred that the boys had for Joseph. Jacob really should have picked up on that because Joseph would have been a lot happier if he hadn't been sold into slavery. Nevertheless, this was all part of God's plan. And so Jacob said, "Go see how they're doing." And so he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem, and he found a man wandering in the fields. And the man asked him, "What are you looking for?" He said, "I'm looking for my brothers. Have you seen them?" And the man said, "Oh, they've gone away. I heard them say, 'Let's go to Dothan.'" Now, Dothan is north of Shechem, another 25 miles, about 40 kilometers. There's actually not a village there. It's a broad valley, and I would think very good for pasturing sheep. So Joseph went after his brothers, and he found them in Dothan. Now, recognize Dothan is about 120 kilometers away from Hebron. So Joseph is a good 2 weeks walk north of his father's tent. They're way north, and the boys in verse 18 saw him from afar, and before he came near, they conspired to kill him. Now that makes perfectly good sense. They hated him. As long as he lived, he was a threat to their inheritance, their futures, and the futures of their families, their children, were at risk as long as Joseph was alive. So the idea of killing Joseph is not a far-fetched idea. They said to one another, "Here comes that dreamer." The most important thing in Joseph's life is his dream. Here's a kid with a dream. He's got a big dream. Someday he's going to be somebody. Joseph is the emblem of the counter dream for these boys. The boys would rather that Joseph would just go away. They say, "Here comes that dreamer. Come, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits that we see here. And we will say some fierce animal has devoured him, and we shall see what becomes of his dreams." But when Reuben heard it, now you'll remember Reuben is the firstborn. Reuben is the eldest son born to Leah. I find it fascinating that Reuben is not the child of promise. Judah is, because Reuben is actually a much nicer guy. Reuben is actually behaving as an honorable man here. And so Reuben said, "Let's not take his life." Reuben said, "Shed no blood. Throw him into the pit, but don't lay a hand on him." And he was intending to rescue them out of their hand and restore him to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the robe of many colors, and they threw him into a pit. And there was no water in the pit at the time. So apparently it was a cistern, a place for the storage of water. And they sat down to eat, and looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites. Now, this man on the camel is not an Ishmaelite. He's actually an Egyptian. He was part of the party of Egyptians with their camels who provided a ride for us around the pyramids when I was there one time. I'll tell you that story some other time. They were they're an unscrupulous sort. But at any rate, this is not an Ishmaelite, it's an Egyptian. But the Ishmaelites, the Arabs, ran their caravans around and up and down the King's Highway. And up and down the international trade route. Here was a band of Ishmaelite traders coming down the way from Gilead, the hill country of Syria, with their camels bearing gum and balm and myrrh on their way to carry it down to Egypt. So tradesmen coming from Mesopotamia through the desert down eventually to Egypt along the coastal highway. And when Judah said to his brothers, and this gives us some idea of Judah's character. Judah said to his brothers in verse 26, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? What's in it for us? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." Like, okay, so it's all right to sell him into slavery, but that's better than killing him. And his brothers listened to him. They thought that sounded like a good idea. Maybe we'll get a little money out of the deal. So the Midianite traders passed by. They drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. 20 shekels was the going rate for a male healthy slave. He was sold as a slave to the slave traders. Slavery is an ancient practice. This is not the first time it's been mentioned in the Bible. Slavery was practiced in the ancient world. Among the most prolific slave traders in ancient times were the Arabs, the Ishmaelites. That's because they had the caravans. The other nations might go on military expeditions and take slaves, but it was the Ishmaelites who could get those slaves to market. And they specialized in that. Sometimes they took slaves, sometimes they bought them, and frequently they sold them. This is a common part of Arabic culture, and actually is to this day, although it's no longer legal in any of the Arab-speaking nations. It's still practiced. And even harems are still practiced today. The Ishmaelites took Joseph down to Egypt. Now Reuben returned and he found that the boy was gone, and they didn't know what to do. So the boys took Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat. They sent the robe to Jacob. Jacob identified it. And he was distraught. He was unhappy. He says, "I will go down to Sheol mourning my son." And his father wept. Meanwhile, and this is verse 36, the end of chapter 37. Meanwhile, the Midianites, who are Ishmaelites and Midianites are the same deal, had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. Okay. We'll come back to Potiphar in a minute. We have to take an interlude for chapter 38, but Potiphar is interesting for a couple of reasons. I'm just going to make a note here because it is actually fairly important for the chronology. I hold an early date. 1876 is an early date for Joseph. A late date would put Joseph in Egypt about 200 years later. The Bible is real clear about the dates for both the Exodus and Joseph. It's the critics who disagree with that. But one of the arguments has always been that Joseph must have been serving under a group who took over in Egypt during the Second Intermediate Period from about 1750 to about 1550 BC, a group called the Hyksos, who were a Syrian-based warlord group who just took control of Egypt. They were never the majority in Egypt. They ruled because they were evil people. They were bad people. But they were Semitic people, Syrians. So the theory is the Hyksos must have brought Joseph down. That's contradicted by the clear statements in the Bible that Joseph went down into Egypt with his people 430 years before the Exodus. It's also contradicted by a whole bunch of details in this text. And one of those details is the name Potiphar. Potiphar is not a Syrian name. It's not a Semitic name. It's an Egyptian name. When we go through the Joseph story, we find huge amounts of what I call local color. Joseph operates in an Egyptian cultural environment. The cupbearer and the chief baker are Egyptian. The pharaoh, who is probably Sesostris II, is Egyptian. The cultural details, like Joseph not being willing to eat with his brothers, the miscellaneous other things, lots and lots of little details, are Egyptian rather than Semitic. That means that Joseph went down at a time when the court and the institutions of Egypt were Egyptian. This is prior to the Hyksos period, prior to 1750 BC. And there's no reason at that point not to accept the biblical date of 1876 for Jacob's descent into to Egypt to meet with his son Joseph. Okay, chapter 38 is an interlude. Here's a picture of Jerusalem from the south. The kind of roundish tower on the right is the Dormition Abbey. Dormition is a name that Roman Catholics have given to the sleep of Mary. And of course, there's no biblical data for that, but they built a great big church in memory of that. And right nearby is an even taller monument that is a mosque. That's actually the minaret of the mosque that's built on Mount Zion. In the area in between the Dormition Abbey and the mosque is a room that is celebrated as the upper room by Christians. And it's probably not the right place either. So the Dormition Abbey is really no place. The mosque celebrates something that didn't happen, and the upper room probably was elsewhere. But anyway, that's Jerusalem from the south, and this is approximately where these events with Judah happen. So chapter 38 is a story of Judah. Happened at that time that Judah went down from his brothers and turned aside to an Adullamite whose name was Hira. And Judah saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua. And he took her and went into her, and she conceived and bore a son. And he called his name and yet again, and that was Onan. And she bore a son. And there was a third one, and his name is Shelah. And Judah was in Kezib when she bore him. Okay. So Judah, who we've already determined is not a very nice guy, took a wife from amongst the Canaanites. Now that's against the rules, but we don't know what the rules are yet. But Judah didn't mind breaking the rules, and took a wife from among the Canaanites and began having children by Shua. And after a bit, Judah took a wife for his firstborn, whose name was and this girl's name was Tamar. And we're not told anything about Tamar. Her name is not a Hebrew name. She's probably also Canaanite. That also tends to be a fairly important detail. So Tamar was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and so Judah's firstborn, was wicked, and so he was put to death. And so Judah sent Onan, his brother, to perform the duty of a brother-in-law. That is to go into the widow and raise up a child by that widow in Ur's name. And Onan didn't want to do that. So he behaved shamefully and refused to do his duty. And so God killed Onan. That left only Shelah, who at this time was a relatively young boy and not ready for marriage yet. Judah told Tamar, go back to your father's household, be a widow until my youngest, Shelah, is old enough to give to you. Well, Shelah got to be a man, and Judah paid no attention to the promise that he had made. And so in the course of time, Shua's daughter, the wife of Judah, died, and Judah was comforted, and then he went up to Timnah, and he went to Hira the Adullamite, and Tamar was told that your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear the sheep. So she took off her widow's garments and covered herself with a veil and wrapped herself up. She sat at the entrance of Enaim and pretended to be a prostitute. Judah, wandering by, saw that there was a prostitute there, so he suggested that they might have a quick relationship. The prostitute said, "What will you give me?" And he said, "Well, I'll send you a young goat from the flock." And she said, "Well, that's not so good. Why don't you give me a pledge until you send it?" "What pledge shall I give you?" "Well, how about you give me your signet ring and your cord and your staff that's in your hand." Now, those are all three fairly distinctive things. So he gave them, and then he went into her, and she conceived. Then she arose and went away. Taking off her veil, she put on her widowhood garments. And then Judah sent the young goat by his friend to take the pledge from the woman's hand, but he didn't find her. And he asked, "Where is that cult prostitute that was here?" And alas, the men of the land didn't know anything about a prostitute on that corner. So Judah said, "Well, let her keep those things." About 3 months later, Judah was told, "Tamar, your daughter-in-law, is with child. She's pregnant by immorality." And Judah said, "Well, bring her out here. Let's have her burned." Judah is quite a piece of work, actually. He would have his own daughter-in-law burned for immorality when he, in fact, is the evil man. Anyway, as she was being brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law, "By the man to whom these things belong, I am pregnant. Please identify them." And there were the signet and the cord and the staff. And Judah identified them and said, "She is more righteous than I." And he did not know her again. When the time of her labor came, there were twins. And we do the thing with the tying of ropes and whatnot. And afterward, the boy is born. His name is Perez. And the other is named Zerah. Now, the firstborn, Perez, is the child of promise. When we trace the messianic line from Adam to Christ, it comes through Judah and Perez, not Onan or or Shelah, but Perez. Tamar, the daughter-in-law, the Canaanite daughter-in-law, who was badly treated, ends up in the line of Christ. It's quite a story. It's in many ways a rather disgusting story. There's prostitution, incest, shame. This is an ugly little story, and yet there it is in the Bible, and it's a story that reminds us again that our salvation doesn't depend on a long string of saints. Our salvation doesn't depend on human goodness at all. God doesn't save us because we're good. God saves us because he is good. In chapter 39 through 41, we see, meanwhile, back in Egypt, we see Joseph's rise to power. And this is an interesting story because we're going to get back into Joseph's dreams. Now, Joseph had a dream. One day, the sun and the moon and 11 stars are going to bow down to me. Well, that's not exactly happening the way he had anticipated. Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, had bought him from the Ishmaelites who brought him down there, and the Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man. And he was in the house of his Egyptian master. His master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him. They made him overseer of the house and put him in charge of all that he had. Now, what's happening here? Potiphar is an important man. He's captain of the guard, which makes him fairly important in the court of Sesostris II, the Pharaoh of Egypt. Pretty important man. Because of that, he's away a lot. He's got a lot on his mind. He needs a good manager for his household. The household would consist of not just the house, but his family and all of the servants. In a great house like Potiphar would have had, there are many servants, cooks and bakers and miscellaneous cleaners and keepers and gardeners and all the people that would work in a household like this. Some of those were slaves like Joseph. Some of them were free men who worked for wages. But this would have been a great house and would have been an important place. And this chief of the guard, Potiphar, had a dream. He dreamed that his household might be efficiently run. And that had never really worked for him. He'd always worried about things. People probably had stolen from him. People probably had treated him badly. And so when he ran into Joseph, he realized, here's a man I can trust. Here's a man who has the skills to manage the household well and is honest enough to treat me honorably. This is Potiphar's dream come true. Joseph spent, we're not told how many years, helping Potiphar's dream to come true. And then everything comes to pieces. Now, Joseph was a handsome man in form and appearance. After a time, his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph. Now, Potiphar's wife is one of those famous characters. This is the bored housewife character. And I don't really blame her. Potiphar was probably away a lot. He's got other things on his mind most of the time. So Potiphar's wife was looking for some entertainment. She wasn't looking for an alternative husband. She was looking for some fun. And she's not a very nice lady. And so she suggested that she and Joseph could have a little afternoon thing going on. And Joseph said, "How can I do a thing like that? Behold, my master has no concern about anything in the house. He's trusted me." And the wife kept pushing him. She spoke to Joseph day after day. One day he went into the house to do his work, and there were none of the men in the house. And she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and fled and got out of the house. So he was in his long inner coat, what we call a tunic, which is in a place like Egypt that would be rather shameful. The great men were either in a full garment or they might be in these skirts, like you see the two guys on the left here, who are actually gods. But you certainly wouldn't want to come out in your tunic, which is what we would call underwear. And she caught him by the outer garment, which was a wraparound robe. And as soon as he saw that he had left his garment in her hand, he fled the house, and she called the men and said, he tried to rape me. And she accuses Joseph of rape. Now, when Potiphar comes back, Potiphar had no real choice but to believe his wife. This is, after all, his wife. He's going to have to try to make peace at home. He probably knows what kind of woman he's married, but he chooses to believe the wife. And I guess I don't blame him, but this is a dishonorable thing for him to do, just as dishonorable as his wife. And she complains that she's been raped, and he has to believe her. So he takes Joseph and has him thrown in jail. Joseph is thrown into the prison. And we're told the end of chapter 39, the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. And the keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper. So here we have yet another Egyptian character. This is the prison superintendent, who has a dream that one day he could find somebody who could take charge of all the affairs in the prison and make everything run easily and smoothly and without difficulty. And his dream came true. Here comes Joseph. And Joseph worked hard. He worked honorably. He did the right things. And the prison was running like a Swiss watch. Everything was going just swimmingly. Everything was clean and clear. And Joseph again rose to prominence in the prison. Sometime after this, the cupbearer of the king and the baker committed some offense against their lord, the king of Egypt, and they were thrown in prison. And the captain of the guard appointed Joseph to be with them. He attended them, and they continued for some time in custody. One night, they both dreamed. So the cupbearer and the baker are going to have dreams. And the cupbearer had a dream, and the baker had a dream, and they said, "Boy, we've had some dreams, and nobody can interpret these dreams. What do you suppose these dreams mean?" And Joseph ends up interpreting the dreams of the cupbearer and the baker. The cupbearer says, in my dream, there was a vine before me, and the vine were 3 branches. And it budded, and the clusters ripened into grapes, and Pharaoh's cup was in my hand. I took the grapes and pressed them, and I placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. And Joseph said, oh, well, this is a good dream. You're going to like this dream. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office. You shall place Pharaoh's cup in his hand. So the cupbearer was happy with his dream. So the baker decided he would do the same thing. The chief baker said, I had a dream. There were 3 cake baskets on my head. The uppermost basket, there were all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating it out of the basket on my head. Okay. And Joseph said, oh, this is not such a good dream. This is a bad dream. The interpretation is this: the 3 baskets are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat the flesh from you. So the chief baker is going to have his head cut off and his body hanged on a tree. Well, in 3 days, exactly this happened, and the cupbearer's dream came true. So did the baker's. Joseph seems to be spending a career helping other people make their dreams come true. He's good at making things work for people. He's very good at understanding what's coming next, and yet his own dream keeps receding farther and farther into the background. Chapter 41, years go by and Pharaoh dreamed. Pharaoh had a dream. How about that? And yet all during this time, the chief cupbearer didn't remember Joseph. He forgot him. Until Pharaoh had a dream, and he dreamed there at the Nile there were 7 cows, attractive and plump, and they were feeding on the reed grass. And afterwards 7 other cows, ugly and thin, came up out of the Nile. And they stood there, and eventually the ugly cows ate the fat cows. And Pharaoh woke up. And then he fell asleep again and dreamed a second time. And behold, 7 ears of grain, plump and good, were growing on the stalk. And after them sprouted 7 thin, blighted ears. And the thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump ears. And so in the morning, his spirit was troubled. He sent the chief magicians of Egypt, and none of them could do a thing. They couldn't give him any help at all. And then finally, the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, I remember there was a Hebrew in prison with me, and he was really good at interpreting dreams. And so Pharaoh called and sent for Joseph. Joseph answered Pharaoh, it is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. That's in 41:16. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, here's my dream. And Joseph said to the Pharaoh in verse 25, the dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years. The 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are one. The 7 lean and ugly cows that come up after, and the 7 empty ears are 7 years of famine. So there will be 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine. God has made known to Pharaoh what is going to happen. So verse 33, now therefore let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. Who do you suppose that discerning and wise man is going to be? Pharaoh has a dream, and in order to make it come true, he needs a discerning and wise man. Pharaoh chose Joseph. And so Joseph rose to power. Joseph became the second in command of Egypt. We call that position the vizier. He was in charge of making Pharaoh's dream come to life in a positive way. During the 7 years of plenty, Joseph had the people bring all of the surplus grain into storehouses. When the famine began to hit, uh, Joseph would sell the grain back to the Egyptians. Now we're told in verse 50 of chapter 41 that Joseph also had a wife in Egypt whose name was Asenath, the daughter. Aha, I'm going to have to change something here. All right. All right, that's good. Joseph married Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, the priest of On, so an Egyptian wife. And 2 sons were born to him. The first was Manasseh, the second Ephraim. Manasseh and Ephraim will be 2 tribes of Israel. And we'll get to those later on. We'll see how they line up. So instead of 1 Joseph tribe, there are 2 Joseph tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh. And both of those end up being fairly important in Israel. So the 7 years of plenty that occurred came to an end, and Joseph opened the storehouses and began to sell grain in Egypt. And this takes us to the stories of Jacob's brothers coming down into Egypt. This is a tomb painting that we find at a place called Beni Hassan in Egypt. This is a picture of long-haired, bearded Syrians coming down with their donkeys and their flocks to Egypt. This is probably very much like what Jacob and his sons looked like when they finally got down to Egypt. So Jacob 42:1, Jacob learned there was food in Egypt, and they make their first journey. The 11 boys, or 10 boys, are sent to Egypt to buy food, and there they run into Joseph, who doesn't tell them who he is. And he plays with them, and he spends some time with them, then puts their money back in their bags and sends them on their way with grain. They go back to Jacob, who is amazed that the money is still there, and he realizes that this is a very bad thing. Joseph has kept one of the boys as a hostage. The boys eventually are forced to go back. The second trip is described in chapter 43. Here, Joseph demands that the Benjamin come down, and the boys don't want to do that. Reuben finally behaves very well. Even Judah is frightened of this and behaves very well. Eventually, Jacob is convinced that it's time to move down to Egypt. A variety of interactions take place here. I find them interesting, but there's a lot of detail here that I'm not going to take time to show you. In chapter 35 or 45, Joseph reveals himself to his brothers. In 45:3, Joseph said, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" And his brothers could not answer him. They were dismayed. And so Joseph said to his brothers, "Come near me, please." They came near. He said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be dismayed or angry because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life." There's a very important principle going on here. Joseph had a dream at the beginning of his career. He dreamed about 11 sheaves bowing down to him, about 11 stars and the sun and moon bowing down to him. And eventually that's going to happen, but not nearly the way he anticipated. His brothers have already bowed down to him. Soon his father and mother will come and bow down to him. This wasn't anywhere close to what he had intended. But what's really going on is that Joseph is the instrument of the fulfillment of God's plan for the whole nation. Because you see, Joseph may have had a dream, and Joseph may have been very good at helping others to accomplish their dreams. He spent his whole life helping other people accomplish their dreams. In the end, God accomplished God's dream. God's dream in this whole thing was the founding of the nation of Israel. So we have this story go on. The boys go back to Jacob. Jacob is convinced finally to go to Egypt. In verse 28 of 45, Israel said, "It is enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." And so Israel took his journey, 46:1, with all that he had, came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. This is a good thing, by the way. For Jacob to be offering sacrifices is a good thing. And God spoke to Israel in the visions of the night, "Jacob, Jacob, here I am." He said, "I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make you into a great nation. I myself will go down with you, and I will bring you up again, and Joseph's hands shall close your eyes." And Jacob set out from Beersheba. They took their livestock and their goods. And then we have in verse 8 and following the names of the descendants of Israel who came down from Egypt. And there's a whole list of the whole family, a total of 70 persons who went down. And Joseph and Jacob are reunited at the end of chapter 46. Then Jacob's family settles in the land of Goshen. Goshen is a wadi, a broad valley to the east of the Nile River in the northern part of Egypt in the Delta. It's a very green, very lush place to this day, and that's apparently where they lived. Here's a picture of the Nile. It's very flat, lots of water running through the middle of it. And actually, it could be a very pleasant place to live. It rarely rains in Egypt. I've never seen it rain. The water comes mostly from the Nile River running through the middle of it. So we have Joseph dealing with the people of the land of Egypt, and very shrewdly, and we're not going to go through all of that. People have brought up the question of ethics. You know, how could Joseph ethically sell the surplus grain back to the Egyptians? And there's some. That's a valid question. He couldn't exactly give it to them because the government, the authorities, did in fact store all that grain at government expense, and so it had to be sold back. Still, what happened was that government authority was centralized in Pharaoh, and Joseph was the instrument of that. Whether that's good or evil, I'm not going to argue right now. Because God has a much larger plan in mind. God is doing something on a much larger scale with Joseph and with Israel. So Jacob blessed, or Jacob went down. Joseph dealt with Egypt, and the end of the life of Jacob is described here. He's 147 years old, and near the end, he wants to bless his sons and the sons of Joseph. First, Ephraim and Manasseh are brought to him in chapter 48, and then the blessing of the sons of Israel are found in chapter 49. And these are the blessings of the 12. It's interesting. It would actually make a series of sermons to look through the blessings of each of the 12 tribes and then look at the history of Israel as it unfolds. For what Jacob is doing here is prophesying by means of blessing what would happen with each of the 12 tribes of Israel. I'm not going to walk through that. It's interesting stuff and it's good stuff. As we get to chapter 50, Jacob dies, and after Jacob's death, Joseph arranged for the Egyptians to make a caravan to take the body back to Shechem, and Jacob's tomb or back to Hebron, and Jacob is laid with his fathers in the tomb of the patriarchs in Hebron. Joseph will eventually die, and his body will be placed in Shechem. But before that can happen, we've got one last scene with Joseph. Joseph's brothers, this is 50 and 15. Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, and they said to themselves, "It may be that Joseph will hate us and pay us back for the evil that we did to him." So they went to talk to him about that. But Joseph said, and this is verse 19, "Do not fear, for am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today." And so eventually Joseph's dream came true, but not in the way that he had intended. Throughout his career, Joseph found meaning in his own life by helping other people to achieve their dreams. And in the midst of it all, the most important dream of all, God's dream for Israel, came true. And Joseph was the instrument of achieving God's blessing on the whole nation. And so, verse 22, Joseph remained in Egypt, he and his father's house. And Joseph lived 110 years, and Joseph saw Ephraim's children to the third generation. And so Joseph said to his brothers, "I'm about to die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land that he swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." And then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, "God will surely visit you and carry up my bones from here." So Joseph died. And they embalmed him, and he was put in a borrowed coffin in Egypt. I want to think for just a moment here about the overall place of Genesis in the story of the Bible. For Genesis begins with a perfect and sinless universe, freshly set spinning from the hand of God, a beautiful place, a garden. It ends with a borrowed tomb in Egypt. I think it's clear that there is a downward progression in Genesis. We start out with the whole great universe and narrow down to one race, one family, one people group. Finally, Abraham, and then Isaac, and then Jacob, and had 12 sons, and Israel is the story of the rest of the Bible. When we get to Exodus, we'll be looking at Israel for the whole rest of the Old Testament. But the more important progression is this movement from sinless to sinful. It is not encouraging to see the people of God falling into sin and becoming indeed a thoroughly evil people group. We see Joseph as a breath of fresh air in all of this, but for the most part, the sons of Jacob, the tribes of Israel, are not going to be very admirable people. And our salvation does not depend on how good they were. The messianic line passes through this family. And our salvation does not depend on the perfection of the messianic line. This is all going to work out well. This will work out as God intends. Because in the end, although Joseph may have had his dreams, and those dreams came to pass after a fashion, the most important dreams of all are God's dreams. We need to learn to help one another succeed in what we dream of. For along the way, God is accomplishing his purposes in the world. And that part we can count on. Okay, we're done with the book of Genesis, amazingly enough. I'm going to unmute all of us now so we can say goodbye. We will be back on Monday, and you'll be amazed to notice that I will start the book of Job on Monday. We'll only spend an hour or so in the book of Job, and then we'll go on to the book of Exodus. But on Monday, I'll explain why we go on to the book of Job after Genesis. Hey, it's been a real pleasure going through Genesis with you all. I look forward to continuing this study. Thank you for your attention. I love seeing all your faces. I love seeing everybody. I can hardly wait until travel can start up again and we can all come back to Italy and see you all. Maybe it won't be until next summer, but I hope we can do that before then. So anyway, bye-bye. And we'll see you all on Monday. God bless you.
Thank you, Dr. John.
Thank you, Dr. John.
Thank you so much, Dr. John.
Entirely my pleasure. I've loved doing this.
Happy weekend.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night, Dr. John.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Good
Take
night,
care now.
everyone.
All right.
Ciao
Bye-bye.
a tutti.
Buonanotte.
Buonanotte.
Note tutti.
Bye-bye.